back to teratogens, are terrorists of the in-uterine world. So we mentioned alcohol, which we will go back to and talk more about. And then we are going to talk about smoking as well. So despite people being warned, or pregnant women being warned, that smoking can put your future child at risk, you still have 20 to 25% of pregnant women who still continue to smoke throughout their pregnancy. And so some of the risks that it includes are low birth weight, which we mentioned before how low birth weight is a really great risk because any extra weight the baby has on it is considered great because it makes them a little more stable in their environment when they do lose the weight, and that extra pudge is good for them. It also increases your risk of miscarriage, increases your risk of your child having mental retardation on some level, and then it increases the risk of ADD or ADHD by 3 times. So smoking is not something that has any beneficial attributes to the future baby, or it has a lot of negative ones. So it's amazing that despite warnings, people still don't give it up, and they have a lot of excuses, or like we talked about, defense mechanisms coming into play of rationalization of why they do it and how it's okay. And so we also know that nicotine can affect the migration of brain cells when the brain's developing, which you're going to see a lot more of when we go and watch a video. So I'll post the video for brain migration cells in a bit, but I'll explain it while we watch it on here. So get this thing to work. Other teratogens beyond alcohol and cigarettes, prescription pills, even if you are prescribed them and they're not being taken illegally, it's still a big issue. So that's why if you're a female, every time you go to the doctor and they're going to prescribe you anything, or they're just checking you out, they always ask, is there any chance you could be pregnant? And if you think there might be, they always make you take a pregnancy test, because if they're going to do an x-ray, if they are going to prescribe you anything, there is a risk that if you're pregnant, it could hurt the fetus or the embryo or whatever stage it's in. Vitamins, if you get too much of a certain vitamin or you have a high intake, it can cause birth defects. Lead, which is something we worry about. So if you live in a home where, it was painted in the 50s or 40s, they always make you get like a lead screening of your home because it's a risk to everybody, but also to pregnant women. Mercury, which we don't have to worry about a ton, but fish. Fish can contain mercury, and that's why one of the reasons why women, when they're pregnant, they can't eat seafood, they can't eat fish, especially like raw fish like sushi, but they should just attempt to stay away from most fish because there's a potential for mercury in them. So, and then obviously street drugs, which we don't want you to ever take, but when you're pregnant, the thing is, when you are on drugs and you're addicted to them, your baby is also born addicted to them. So alcohol is the big one that plays the most significant risk to a baby because it's a legal drug and people use it often in America and throughout the world. And so the most significant risk comes between 2 to 6 weeks before the mom even realizes she may be pregnant. And there's a lot of studies published that say that there's like a safe amount of alcohol to consume, and there's all this research done that says you can have up to 1 glass of wine this often during your pregnancy. The truth of the matter is that you can't. Even if the research says, I'm not going to say you can't, but it's one of those things where, is it worth the risk? We know alcohol leads to severe brain deficits and physical and cognitive abilities. Like these kids suffer great deals because of it. And so, if you're pregnant with a baby, why risk it at all? No alcohol is probably worth the risk of these potential devastating effects that you can't fix. You can't go and have them have surgery or be on medication and then they're okay. That's not how it works. Their physical construction of their brain and their systems are forever ruined due to alcohol that the mother was drinking. So fetal alcohol syndrome is defined as a physical and cognitive abnormality in kids caused by drinking or heavy drinking while a woman is pregnant. So fetal alcohol syndrome and these consequences that it has, I mentioned before, mental retardation, behavioral problems, low birth weight, all of those very detrimental to the development of a child. And so this picture right here is a child diagnosed fetal alcohol syndrome. And A lot of times you can tell something's different about the kid, and even there are telling signs, which we'll talk about in a moment here, of physically how they just look different. And if we were to look at their brains, they look way different. So 90% of these people in this study that were done, so 253 people that were formally diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, 90% had some type of mental health problems. Typically, it would be mental retardation of some sort, but it could be anything. 60% had trouble with the law, probably due to low cognitive function and not being able to understand, right from wrong, make good judgments. Disrupted education, meaning they had to bounce from school to school, or they were kicked out or suspended or expelled. 50% had inappropriate sexual behavior. Once again, not understanding, not being able to discern what is okay and what is not to do. Impulse control issues. So we also saw antisocial behavior, which, are negative behaviors. It's not antisocial in terms of staying away, but more antisocial. And we talked about behavioral learning, where they do things that are just not beneficial to a community or to relationships, and they don't seem to really care about that. And then criminal behavior, and all of this is linked to physical problems with their brain. It's due to their brain being structured incorrectly. So if we look at the brain of a normal infant versus a baby that has fetal alcohol syndrome, you can just see, you don't even have to have any knowledge of what is wrong or right, or any training on neurology, right, or neuropsychology or whatever. That one of those brains does not look correct. So these are the brains of 2 infants who passed away rather young. One, fine brain development. The other, fetal alcohol syndrome. This brain's smaller. There are less convolutions, or those gyri and sulci, they're not there. And then you have this weird crevice at the top where the fissure is not healthy and correct. And it just looks like lighter in color, and that's because it's not as dense. It's not as thick as a normal brain. So we're going to watch this video. You won't be able to hear sound on it, but that's okay because I want to talk anyway over this video. So I'm going to fast forward it to where they talk and they show that specific view of the brain. So, and I'll post this. You'll just have to fast forward. I'll give you the time to like 7 minutes in. But it's going to talk about how the look of kids with fetal alcohol syndrome. They have these wide set eyes. They typically have a flat area right under their nose. We have ridges. You can feel the bumps if you drag your finger under your nose. And they also typically have a lack of upper lip. They don't typically have one that's well seen. So people have been studying these types of kids for a very, very, very long time. And so they're going to show drawings of kids that are normal, and then ones that have fetal alcohol syndrome. So normal kids, and then over here we have the ability to draw the kid the same age with fetal alcohol syndrome. They have no ability to copy these shapes. And in this one, when they were drawing an impulse control issue, they couldn't stop drawing noses and eyes on this human face, right? It just looks all out of sorts for a kid that probably should have been drawing a very, average looking drawing of a human at that age. So here's the brain scan again that we just looked at. And so he talks about how you can just tell that the infant brain is smaller for fetal alcohol syndrome. There aren't as many wrinkles. There aren't as many deep lines in it. Something about it is just inherently off, right? It's wrong. That's not how a brain should look. And so then he shows this cross-section of a normal infant brain. And it shows really dense packed matter that he's picking to, right? Like that gray matter. It's really dense. You can see the really deep lines on the side for those convolutions. This is a healthy, good brain. There's holes in the middle that are supposed to be those ventricles. Those are correct. Now, this is the cross-section of an infant with fetal alcohol syndrome. And when you look at it, you wouldn't even know it's a cross-section of a human brain, because it looks like a thick, round worm almost, right? It's white. It's light. There are no wrinkles. There are no lines going in to show the convolutions. There are these really weird giant gaps in it. There's no dense layers. All of that is going to affect how the brain is processing information and how that person is living their life. So I'm going to pause the video here. So this shows, get rid of that. This shows that here's the surface of the brain, this little thin white line down here. That's the actual surface of the brain. But then on a brain of an infant with fetal alcohol syndrome, there's this extra layer, right? So all of this up here, all of that layer is random brain cells. So when your brain is forming when you're in uterus, it is saying like these clump of cells, you're going to go on to form the hippocampus, and maybe you're going to go and you're going to form the frontal lobe, and you're going to form the visual cortex. They're all sent to areas of the brain so they know where to go, because they're going to create these structures correctly and densely enough, and functionality is going to be great. But when this brain is forming of a baby whose mom is a heavy drinker, it's like the cells are drunk too, and they forgot where they were going to form what part of the brain. So they just erupt through the surface of the cerebral cortex, and they just form this like weird layer on top that is just a mishmash of all these different brain cells. So when you have a bunch of different things together, there's no function there. And all it is doing is making that brain really smooth, and there's an extra layer of random stuff to get through, or for neural impulses to try to deal with. And then all those brain cells that are up there, they're missing from the structures they're supposed to be a part of. So those structures are going to be lacking. It really shows why the brains of these kids aren't working correctly. Like physically, you can look and see why they're not working appropriately. Drugs are also an issue. Street drugs especially, but any kind of drug. Like the opioid crisis that's going on, right? People abusing these opioid drugs, whether it be heroin or prescription pills. Babies are born addicted to drugs if their moms are addicted to drugs. So if the mom has done a bunch of heroin over the course of her pregnancy, that baby is born addicted to heroin. And when that baby's born, it's going to be underweight. It's probably going to be premature. It's not going to have its mom around because the mom's going to be arrested for it. And so they're going to lack the physical like relationship, which is fine because that mom is abusing drugs and isn't a safe person. But then that baby also, with being underweight, addicted, all these things, it also has to go through the withdrawal process. And if you've ever seen videos or known someone who's had to go through with withdrawal, it's physically taxing and very tough to get through. And imagine that being a potentially premature underweight infant, right? And now they're having to go through withdrawal symptoms. And it's super taxing, and it's really hard on a baby, and they possibly don't make it. So that's why we had talked about those baby snugglers that hospitals are having, where they ask people, especially like retired people, older people, because I think you have to be 18 or older to do it, to come volunteer their time. And all your job is to come in, and babies who don't have parents around for whatever reasons, or, you know, especially babies like this, addicted to drugs, you just come in and you hug them and you rock them. You don't have to do anything medical to them. You just snuggle them and give them that human contact, and they've shown that it actually helps them develop and heal faster than babies who are without that touch. So other teratogens we've seen, thalidomide is one. It was a drug used in the 50s and 60s. Moms didn't like morning sickness, right? There is a common thing that when women get pregnant, they barf a lot, and it's very unpleasant. And so if it got to this stage in the 50s and 60s, doctors would just say, hey, go take this medicine. Your morning sickness will go away. It'll be great. And women did it because morning sickness usually shows up pretty early in the pregnancy. And they would do this, and then they would have these babies born. And I think the term is like flipper babies. They'd be born with no arms or no legs, or maybe like they would have an arm growing out of their shoulder instead of like an arm developed with a wrist and a hand. So, drugs that we take that we thought were safe, might not be. That's why there's stronger testing for it today. Antibiotics, hormones, vitamins, all these things can be potential issues. Also, malnutrition of the mom and stress can have a negative effect. So shortage of folic acid. You need folic acid to help the brain of the baby develop. And so, please go away. Sorry. And that's why they take prenatal vitamins, and it has a ton of iron and folic acid, all these things that are necessary for the baby's development. The idea that mom should eat healthy too, and eat a lot of fresh fruit and leafy greens. Also, the mother should try to avoid stress if she can, because the stress hormone like cortisol, it can cross the barrier to the baby and make the baby super stressed out, and that's unhealthy as well. And so the baby can feel the stress and be stressed. Now, this baby is my baby. He's not stressed. Well, not because of me being stressed. This is a baby stressed from having his first bath. But imagine if you were stressed throughout most of your pregnancy. You might have a baby who's really on edge and really testy and just really like hard to calm down because they've been soaked in cortisol for the 9 months of the pregnancy. So that's it for in-uterine development. Like I said, I like to brag about my baby on these ones. And yeah, in-uterine development, all the cool things you can do when babies are cooking in the womb, and all the abilities that those fetuses have is pretty amazing. So, all right, when you come back, we will look at baby's arrival, so after they're born.